Well, I would ask you to keep in mind that you have several generations of senior officers now whose only experience is really the last 30 years. And what have we seen over the last 30 years? Somalia, Haiti, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Kosovo, followed by Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and then this sudden expansion into Africa. We also have troops in various places in Latin America. We don't talk about that very much. So the bottom line is that you're not going to get any change at all unless you're willing to go in and essentially decapitate the senior leadership of the armed forces, because they are steeped in the belief, which is a strong neocon principle, that the world is a better place when the U.S. armed forces occupy most of it, to be perfectly blunt. When you have U.S. forces in almost every country in the world will be better off. Now, I don't think so, and I don't think there's much evidence to support that. But you've got to go back and understand the mentality. As soon as you talk to the neocons, they say, well, look what we did during World War II. And there is no objective assessment of the Second World War. There was this assumption that everything we did was right, which is a bad assumption, by the way, because we had no interest in the complete and utter destruction of both Germany and Japan, which we have been compensating for the next, 80 years. But there's no discussion of that. So you have this sort of fantasy about what we think we did, which we didn't, and that's applied to the present. And finally, I would say we have lots of 19th century thinkers. And I mean this, people whose view of strategy is pre-World War I. That you've got to have somebody somewhere on the ground or you have no influence. And you have to be prepared militarily to intervene anywhere on a moment's notice. In other words, the world is your oyster, as somebody named Hitler said. We don't want the world to be our oyster. We have to re-examine the wisdom of this presence. If you look at polling data in the Islamic world, for instance, it says, do you like the United States? If you go to Morocco, Tunisia, a number of different places, they're wildly pro-American because we're not there. So the notion that we need to be everywhere is just fundamentally false. But that's tied to this massive military-industrial congressional complex. It's tied to funding. People on the Hill have streams of income as a result of support for all of this. So this is a huge problem that I think only bankruptcy will solve. Remember, when did the British finally leave India? When they couldn't afford to stay. When the debt to GDP ratio was 246% in 1946, it's time to leave, we can't afford to stay. So I think we're stuck right now. And this monster that has been created over the last 80 years is going to keep clawing its way back every time because it's built in. So you need fundamental reform across the boards, changes in the institution, but most important, changes in leadership. Look at the State Department. Listen to Tony Blinken. Go back and listen to what Pompeo said. I don't hear many differences. It's appalling. It's frightening. So if you're sitting in Moscow right now, or you're sitting in Beijing or any number of capitals, people say, what difference does it make who is elected to what in the United States? The same nonsense keeps pouring out of Washington. I think that's the lesson.